Hi, I'm Claire Mitchell, QC. Welcome to the Witches of Scotland podcast. I'm a lawyer who specialises in miscarriage of justice cases, and we're bringing you this podcast because we want to tell you about the women who were accused, prosecuted, convicted, and ultimately executed as witches in Scotland.
I'm Zoe Venditozzi, and I'm a writer who's always had an interest in the witches, and I feel that this dark mark against Scotland needs a reckoning.
The campaign Witches of Scotland wants three things. Firstly, a pardon for all those convicted of witchcraft. Secondly, an apology for all those who were accused as witches. And finally, a national monument in recognition of all those who are affected by this terrible miscarriage of justice.
Over the forthcoming weeks, we'll be talking to a whole host of experts about the history and the modern day connections to the Witches of Scotland. Hello and welcome to the Witches of Scotland podcast. How are we all? Are we fine?
I'm fine. I'm good.
You're good. That's good. I am quite good. I'm definitely looking forward to the fact that it's our holidays, our school holidays start tomorrow. That's quite exciting. Yes, yeah. Obviously, I'm off to Barbados.
Yeah.
In a round the world trip. Like more likely, my holiday is going to be to maybe Tayport this year.
You know,
yeah.
Don't knock it.
Yeah, not a problem. I do miss the thought of I think it's more like looking forward to a holiday even.
Yeah, having something planned to do.
Yeah. Doing up the garden or something like that just doesn't hold any sort of thrill for me, to be honest.
No, absolutely not. You want to be away from your garden and away from everything. Just that.
Unless my garden is really beautiful, but it is not. So that is not ideal. Anyway, thanks for joining us. We've got, as ever, a fascinating episode today, which we will get onto in a minute. I think, first of all, and this idea is coming to me in a very natural and spontaneous way. Claire, has there anything been happening in the news this week?
Well, completely spontaneously and off the top of my head, things in the news. Well, what's been happening with us lately? We're continuing to talk to politicians about the pardon, continuing to try and spread the word with those in power to find out what they think about our petition. And now we are just about finding out who the politicians are that are going to be on the various groups that might look at the petition. So that's something that we're working on at the moment. And secondly, well, it's a few weeks back now, we were delighted that Lucy Worsley's production team got in contact with us and invited us to have a meeting with them and a chat about all things Witches of Scotland.
Yeah, that was quite exciting, wasn't it? And it was very gratifying because we were able to point them in the direction of one of the friends of the show. She's been a guest and she's also become a friend too. So that's Judith Gorman, who is so fascinating. She knows so much stuff. She's such an amazing ace and dedicated researcher. So she was on episode
30.
Did you say 30?
Episode 30.
Yeah, where I think she's talking primarily about the Witches of Forfar that she's researched. So because she's such an ace researcher, they're going to be talking to her for Lucy's show. So we're very, very much looking forward to her moment on the telly, which will be absolutely brilliant. Because as we say, every episode, we love the fact that this is a really supportive community where there's people beavering away on their different projects and their different passions, but that we're all under the umbrella of really wanting to address what happened in Scotland and redress the miscarriage of justice. So it's nice to see another aspect of it that will reach a much wider audience through a BBC programme. So we're very much looking forward to seeing that.
Yes, can't wait. And our guests today that we'll come on to talk about later, there are more people that have been working. Well, one of our guests was an academic who worked on history and the issue of witch hunts, but someone else who has just come to it really quite recently and decided to get involved and research her local area and become quite active. So it's really, really nice to see that and people getting in contact with us and telling us what they're doing in their local area. So if you are somebody who is doing witch-based research or you have anything going on in relation to witch-based events, please do get in contact with us. Usually on Twitter is the best way to get in contact with us because then we can retweet it and we've got a good number of people following us on Twitter. So it means that if you want any publicity for your Scottish history-based projects, we're able to tweet that out to everyone and they can get to see it. So please do get in contact with us if there's anyone else out there doing that sort of thing. But again, completely naturally, Zoe, just apropos of nothing, Are there any women not witches that you want to tell us about this week?
Yes, I'd be delighted to. So we have 3 women this week, which seems to be what we're doing generally. The first one is Jean Brown of Wigton. We don't have any info about her age or any other details about her or her family. Jean Brown was accused of witchcraft in 1706. It's quite a late case. On the 29th of January 1706, she was remanded into the toll booth at Wigton. She provided a detailed confession. Of course, that is in speech marks as ever. And there's a record of the presbytery asking for a commission to prosecute her as a witch sent to the Queen's Advocate in Edinburgh, but there does not seem to have been a reply received. The presbytery paid for her remand, which was about £40 of Scots money, which I'm imagining was a fair amount of money then, not insignificant. The Survey of Scottish Witchcraft sets out her confession in some details, which I'll just read from that now. Brown confessed that the spirits came to her at any time and conversed with her. They were not visible, but she could feel them, and they lay with her carnally as men and women do. She told the presbytery the spirits were God because they could cure sickness, that they were her maker and were the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. She also said she was married to them and that the spirits would take her to heaven. Later described how when she was younger, 3 young, pretty men came to her mother's house and offered the family a piece of paper, some form of contract perhaps, which she took and thereafter always knew more than other people. She confessed that they were good spirits, but did not refer to them as fairies, and they told her the world would be destroyed. Witnesses claimed that she used charms, including a belt which had a turner, a copper coin not legal tender after 1707, and 3 pickles of wheat in it, but she denied this. The spirit showed her a vision of the day of judgment when the heavens were as thunder and fire. The best part of this story is that after this confession, she was charged with devilry, blasphemy, and other particulars of witchcraft, but somehow she escaped. So when she was found guilty, she was excommunicated rather than executed. So she, I'm going to say got away with it, but she probably didn't, because if she was banished and excommunicated, then she would be in real fear, I suppose, of her soul in eternity. But she didn't, at least she wasn't executed.
Yeah, she wasn't executed, but no doubt she would have had to, flee, leaving whatever family and friends that she knew in that particular area, if she knew anyone. I was just delighted to read at the end of that she had escaped. What was interesting about that particular story was that in the Survey of Scottish Witchcraft, there actually is a marker which says that some people believed that she wasn't well. That was why she was doing it. And very rarely you come across that there's any reference to her maybe not being mentally well. But I'm absolutely delighted that whether by her own hand or with someone helping her, she managed to evade the hangman's noose and the pyre for being convicted. So I'm really, really glad that Jean Brown of Wigton managed to get away. Next, we have Ellen Gray. Ellen Gray was a woman accused of witchcraft in 1597. She was remanded to the toll booth at Aberdeen, and unfortunately we don't have anything that we can tell you about her age or her family. She confessed to meetings with the devil. She said he was an old bearded man in white, and she said that she met with him near her house by the loch. She was accused of a number of things, including reducing a man to poverty after they had argued, and having caused a man's wand never to lie down. He later died. Now, we're recording this on Zoom, and I have the benefit of looking at Zoe's face when I said that out loud, which was, I can tell you, quite a strange picture. She was also accused of spoiling milk. Now, think about that. So she had been accused of reducing a man to poverty. So somehow a man had become poor and that was her fault. Causing a man's wand to never lie down. I don't even want to think about how that could have been attributed to her. That man later died. And also of spoiling milk. Unfortunately for poor Ellen, she wasn't as lucky as Jean Brown, and she was executed after trial. So, Zoe, there's a little bit of a theme going on here, because, Zoe, you might want to have a look at the next case. This is another son-in-law case. You've spoken about son-in-law cases before. But Zoe, tell us something about our next woman.
So this next story is from Orkney, and it'd be great to speak to someone if they're Orkney based, if they want to get in touch, because we would be happy to cover more places. And we realised that Shetland's story was quite different in some ways to mainland Scotland. So I wonder whether, again, Orkney would be quite different to mainland Scotland as well. Anyway, this is about a woman called Marian Leyland, who went to trial on the 17th of March, 1633. Allegations included that she, quote, used water to undo forespeaking, i.e. bewitchment, took away cow's milk, revenge after someone stole Marian's kale. She struck a man in the back and he lost the power to do his duty towards his wife. She was also a poor person who was refused alms, and the records don't show the outcome of her trial. So she's accused of used water to undo forespeaking. I'm not really sure. I don't fully understand what that means.
So that means that someone has come to her because they believe that they are bewitched by someone else.
So she's used water in a kind of a spell to undo that bewitchment. Right.
Almost like when water's used when they christen someone.
Right.
There's that sort of image of water. She has used water to get rid of someone else's bewitchment.
She was also accused of taking away a cow's milk. I presume what they mean by that is that she was being accused of drying the cow up, essentially.
Yeah.
Than taking a cup of milk from a cow.
Yes.
And also that was done as revenge. Presumably the drying up of the cow was revenge because someone else stole Marian's kale. And then the next thing is that she's also accused of striking a man in the back, which caused him to lose the power to do his duty towards his wife. I mean, I'm not sure that would cause that to happen. I'm not a doctor.
No.
But I don't see how hitting somebody in the back could stop them doing their marital conjugal duties.
But remember, it's witchcraft, Zoe.
Yes, she can make anything happen in theory. Yeah, but it's interesting that both those stories, though, sort of like the slight levity of the charges being so ridiculous aside, that Marian Leyland and Ellen Gray both have this sort of sexual dynamic to what they're being accused of, which I think is interesting and totally unsurprising. That really this is all boiling down to that idea that women are, they're in league with the devil and they're temptresses and they're interfering with men's natural sexuality, and that means that they're unnatural in some way.
Yeah, they're affecting men's potency one way or the other. And yeah, it seems to me that it's just a catalogue of other people's ails that are being attributed to people. Stopping cows having milk, reducing a man to poverty, causing a man's wand to never lie down, accused of spoiling milk. I mean, these are no doubt poor people themselves with afflictions, but all that's happening is she is being accused of having caused things that she could not possibly have at all. No. So I think in this case, we don't have any record showing the outcome of her trial either. So we just know the stories of Jean Brown, Ellen Gray, and Marian Leyland. We remember these women as women and not as witches.
So this week, we're absolutely delighted to introduce our two guests. Our first guest is Emma Cowan, who is from Corstorphine, Edinburgh. She grew up in the area but knew nothing of the witch trials of Corstorphine. When she found out about the witch trials, she was saddened and angered by the lack of awareness that she held about this time, and she felt compelled to find a way to have these ordinary Corstorphine folk remembered and honoured, believing that a feeling of disempowerment should be responded to with an empowering act. As a counselling therapist, she is naturally drawn to hearing people's stories and working towards facilitating healing. She feels that her interest in remembering the Corstorphine folk wrongly accused of witchcraft has become a type of adaptation and extension of her therapeutic work. A strong theme in the things Emma and others have been doing in Corstorphine focuses on an effort to redistribute the power imbalance that is evident today in the way Corstorphine has memorised the accusers and not the accused. And then appearing with Emma is another guest, and these two women, I think, have only recently met. They talk about it in the podcast, but it's quite interesting what brought them together. So our other speaker today is Norah Carlin, who was brought up in Corstorphine High Street opposite the Dower House and who attended Holy Cross Academy in Leith from 1947 to 1960. She taught history for many years at Middlesex Polytechnic and University in North London, including the theme of witch hunting in Western Europe during the period 1450 to 1750. Having heard about the 1649 witch hunt in the place where she grew up through a cutting from a local paper, she came looking for the Corstorphine Kirk Session Minute Book in the early 1990s. Norah was able to put her research skills to use transcribing the supposed confessions of the 5 women and 1 man accused of witchcraft, despite the difficulties of handwriting and spelling. These documents are extraordinarily rich in detail about village life in Corstorphine and the kind of circumstances in which innocent people could find themselves the focus of deadly witchcraft accusations. Norah has also written books and articles on the British Civil Wars of the 17th century and a history of Holy Cross Academy, in which she found out things about its early years that even her teachers didn't know. An article on farmers and farming in Corstorphine in 1589 will appear soon in a book of essays on Scottish agricultural history. So Norah is, an expert academic as well. So it's fascinating. So welcome to the show, Norah and Emma. I'm delighted today to introduce 2 speakers. We've got Emma Cowan and we've got Norah Carlin, who are going to be talking to us about the independent projects they're doing that have come together, but they'll explain more about that as we get into the show. So welcome, Emma and Norah. It's nice to meet you on here.
Thank you.
Hello. Thank you.
So Claire, do you want to start off how we were contacted first of all, please?
Yes, I think, Emma, you got in contact with us through Facebook Messenger. I think you've seen some of the work that we'd done, and I'll open it up to you. You tell me why you got in contact.
Well, a friend of mine quite a while ago now had said to me, there's a podcast that I think you would like and you need to listen to it. And of course it was your podcast. So started listening to it, and like quite a lot of your listeners, I think became kind of hooked on this history and the story that I had absolutely no knowledge about, just kind of in the background, but nothing really concrete and clear. And, became fascinated, angry, all different things about how do I not know this? So as I was listening to the podcast, I started to kind of wonder about my local area. So I live in Corstorphine, which is just on the outskirts of Edinburgh, kind of close to Edinburgh Airport, actually. So a village that's been around for a long time. And thought, I bet there must have been something that happened in Corstorphine and I want to know about this. So went on, actually, I think you've mentioned it quite a few times, the Edinburgh University's interactive map. Went onto the map, had a look, and I think it had 9 people that had been accused of witchcraft in Corstorphine on there, but not really that much more detail, not much information. But in Corstorphine, there's a local called the Corstorphine Trust, Heritage Trust, and it's in this old building called Dower House in St Margaret's Park in Corstorphine. The building, Norah may be able to know this, but I think the building would have definitely been around at the time of the witch trials in Corstorphine.
It's a wee bit later.
Oh, is it a little bit later?
Mm-hmm.
So got in touch with them and spoke to a woman called Frances McRae, who's the archivist, who I think probably eventually thought, oh my goodness, Emma's name's come back up in my inbox and what's she going to be asking now? But when I got in touch with her, she said, there has been some research on the witch trials in Corstorphine and I can send some information to you. So a couple of days later, a Word document came through and there was, which I now know was Norah's work, but at the time I didn't really know that. And it came through with 7 people on the list who had been accused of witchcraft in Corstorphine. And as I started to read this, I had quite a powerful and quite moving response to the stories that I was reading. In particular, because I know the places that these things happened. And I'm not going to say too much about the women and the one man because Norah will tell you the story, but I think it's helpful for me to say why I had a response. So one of them was a woman who was accused and held in the parish church in Corstorphine, which is still there. And she actually hung herself before could go to trial in the tower. And instantly I was so upset when I read that because I thought, well, I've been to weddings there and Christmas events and christenings and, there's no memory of this poor woman. I've since found out there's small notes of kind of memory of her, but nothing, not like some of the memories of the ministers who have been there. And it felt just out of balance, I think. And then there was another woman who was accused of meeting with the devil on Corstorphine Hill. And I live on Corstorphine Hill, actually. So I wander up those woods all the time and just, take my children there. Love that place. And the thought of this woman being accused of meeting with the devil in such a lovely place, and her story is very sad. She was in her 80s, and Norah will tell you a bit more about what they'd done to her, but I felt really, really sad about it. So I was quite tearful. And then when I got to the end of Norah's research, there was a list, and it had the witch hunters at the list. And this is where I got angry, because the first name that was on it was Lord Forrester. And so he was the Laird of Corstorphine at the time. And straight away I thought, oh my goodness, his family is so remembered in Corstorphine. There's a high school named after that family, Forrester High School. My mum went to that school because we always lived in Corstorphine. And, my friends live in streets named after that family. And I just thought, how is his name remembered in this way, or his family name remembered in this way anyway? And yet, Beatrix and Margaret and so on are not. So I felt angry. And then I noticed also John Kincaid. I know his name from listening to your podcast, and I felt even more angry at that point because he was such a horror, and he was part of the witch trials in Corstorphine. So I really believe when you have a response that's powerful like that and you feel a bit powerless or angry, that you have to do something about it, that you need to respond to it in order to not feel powerless about it. So I contacted Frances and said, oh, Frances, this is awful what I've just read, and I've really had a big reaction to it. Do you think there's any way we could start remembering these people, these Corstorphine folk? And she said, oh, well, actually, when you got in touch with me, it made me think a bit about it, and I'm going to find a place for them in the museum in the Dower House. So their story is going to be remembered in there. I thought, well, that's good. Then I went away and I thought about it, and I thought, that's not enough. So I went back and I said, Frances, I've been thinking again. And this is why I think eventually she probably thought, gosh, here's Emma's name coming up in my inbox again. I said, do you think there's something else that we could do? Maybe a plaque or a memorial or something? So Frances says, well, let me have a think about it and I'll come back to you. So she went to the committee and they talked about it. And she said that the committee is now pretty much all women, I think, on the committee as well. So she was saying, I think that might have helped.
Quite possibly.
They had agreed, and that there was going to be a plaque with the people's names remembered, and it would be outside the Dower House in Corstorphine. So I was pretty pleased about that. But again, I couldn't kind of stop. It still didn't feel like that was quite enough. So I got back and said, I wonder if there's any other way that we could do this, remember them. And she said, well, we could add them to the leaflet of the history of Corstorphine. And I think she said, maybe Norah knows a bit more about this. It sounds to me as if it's a walking history and it has particular places of interest. So she's going to put the story of the Corstorphine folk into this leaflet. So if anyone comes and is doing the walking tour of Corstorphine, they're in there.
How brilliant, Emma. You're an absolute inspiration for others. I mean, this is exactly why we want people to listen to the podcast and to engage with it. And you've gone above and far beyond. I mean, you're going to get a plaque. You're bringing these women's names back to life in the local area. Of course, inspired by the work done by Norah. It's just absolutely brilliant.
And that was partly why then I got in touch with you, because I know at the start of each of the podcasts you have the kind of remembering 3 women, and I thought, oh, you might be interested in this. And then of course with the permission of Norah, then got in touch, and of course you kind of went, no, just come on, which I was going, oh no, I'm just this local person that's got a little interest, and
we're all just local people with a bit of interest.
Yeah. I know. And I think that, like, when I thought about it, I thought, well, they were just kind of ordinary local people. And that's what made me go, actually, yeah, I will come on and do this, because they do need to be remembered and respected and kind of honoured. And there needs to be sort of restorative conversations, I think, or, I mean, that's what it feels like.
Yeah, I think we're unfortunately far past any restoration in the sense that finding the families, but some kind of social restoration of these people and acknowledgement of their names. So tell me what happened. How was the interaction between yourself, Emma, and Norah? Did you contact Norah out of the blue, or how did that go?
Well, we were put in touch through Frances, who kind of shared our emails, and then I contacted Norah. There's another little bit that I want to add before I say it, because what had happened was, because I'm a chatterbox, I started to tell people, lots of people all around my area, do you know the story of the Corstorphine witch? Do you know that? And of course, started telling the story. And instantly people, how do we not know this? This is ridiculous. And what's ended up happening from doing that is there's a group of all women that live on Corstorphine Hill pretty much, who have decided that we're going to do a craftism project to remember the Corstorphine folk. A friend of mine, Carolyn, she runs a craft club basically. And she said, I think we should do a craftism project. And I said, oh, what's that? It sounds interesting. And she knows I like a protest or two, so she was kind of thinking that I would probably quite like this. So basically, we're going to create something that is, it could be through embroidery or sewing, it could be through kind of tiles or something, but a piece, I'm loosely using the word art, but a piece that captures the story and remembers the Corstorphine folk. In doing that, when I spoke to Frances about it, she said, we'll display it in the Dower House as well. And she wants to put it on the first level of the Dower House as well, because that's where most people come in. There's you can get teas and coffees there and things. So it's going to be displayed there. So we've still not decided what that's going to be. We're kind of keen to do it fairly soon because Norah will confirm this, but I think it seems the witch trials happened between May and September, and we would quite like to do it in that time, so maybe kind of August, September time. But Carolyn, I mean, she's got lots of big ambitions. She would quite like to get the local MSPs involved, and she would quite like to kind of take it a bit bigger. Together we're just letting it evolve, and we're going to see where it goes. But it just feels a bit more balanced already, I think.
There's definitely political interest. I mean, we know that ourselves because we've been approached by various politicians, and I've had various meetings with different politicians, different parties, different areas in Scotland. So there's definitely a political interest. I think it's quite sort of zeitgeisty just now.
It's quite a few years ago, actually, that after he heard me speak about it, John Barrett, who was then a Liberal MP, expressed interest in it. So he could be involved as well.
Mm-hmm.
We'll so look forward, Emma, to hearing how things evolve, to seeing how things go. But Norah, how delighted must you be that your work is the work that has inspired all this busyness by Emma?
Yes, this is very, very good. I started on the research many, many years ago. I was brought up in Corstorphine, opposite the Dower House, actually, in Corstorphine High Street. But I was teaching in England at what became Middlesex University. And in my early modern social history course, I dealt with the witch hunt, which happened all over Europe, of course, and nearly all over Europe. Some countries didn't have it, which is interesting. But my sister, who died many years ago, at some point had sent me a cutting from the local, it was a local advertising paper. You remember when we had those?
The Herald and Post or something.
And there was a wee article about the Corstorphine witch hunt of 1649, and that was right bang in the middle of everything I was interested in, really. So I started reading the Kirk Session book. It's in Register House, but they have photocopies. The handwriting is obviously difficult for other people to read. I have read a lot of that kind of hand. And so I read it all and transcribed a lot of it. There is a transcript in the Dower House. So, that's in the public domain. Anybody can read it. Get Frances to photocopy it if you like. But it's an extraordinary document because it gives detailed confessions. Now, I say confessions, but they're all in the third person, when asked who her consorts were, she said a list of names. Now, obviously, there's a dialogue going on between the interrogator and the victim, and how she was pressured into saying that, we just don't know, because it's all written down by Mr. Chalmers, the session clerk and schoolmaster in Corstorphine at the time, as if people had confessed it freely, which I very, very much doubt. There are common themes which occur in confession after confession, which come in a sequence, which is very, very common in witch hunts. It's very, very interesting in Corstorphine, because by this time, some of it was a little bit outdated. It starts off with two women and their husbands supporting them, complaining about slander. They say that they've been called a witch, and it's not true. Then you get a whole load of accusations about causing harm, about making people sick, causing horses to go wild, oxen to run away from the plough, and so on. I think it was horses, actually, to run away from the plough. And rumours repeated that one or other of these first two were responsible for the death of various villagers who said on their deathbeds, it's all because of Beatty Watson or Maggie Bell that I've come to my deathbed. So you get a whole string of accusations like that, which are very, very colourful and give you insights into village life. For example, Maggie Bell had hired somebody's teenage son to mind her cows, and he didn't turn up. And the reason he gave for not turning up was because he's scared of her, because she's a witch, you see. And there's another case where a man claims that one or other of these, Maggie or Beatty, had made his cow sick. And when he got up to see to the cow in the middle of the night, because the cow was roaring all night, he saw a black sow across the doorstep. And there were no pigs in Corstorphine. If you grew up in Corstorphine years ago when the piggeries were down at the bottom of the hill, that's very, very surprising. But in fact, pork meat was thought of as dirty in Scotland at the time. Nothing to do with religion. Remember, you weren't turning on the porch light when you came out of your house in 1649. There's a black shape there. Oh my God, it's a sow. Then the investigation grows and you begin to get these meetings with the devil. And that's a very common sequence, because there were popular ideas about witches as people who could harm or heal by charming. They were called charmers. And it was quite common by now for a charmer who could heal to get the reputation of harming as well. If she can heal, she can harm. Or he, because there were warlocks too. So once the devil gets involved, you find the people examined. Actually, it happens with the second one, Maggie Bell, confessing to having met with the devil. She had met with the devil in the brooms. And you know that before you get to the Forester streets, all the streets are named after the brooms. Then there's a very curious element in this, which is quite unusual and quite controversial, because each of these people, after the first, say that the devil rebaptized them to be his servant instead of God's servant. People have said, but that's nonsense, because baptism can only be the one way.
Did they ask whether or not the devil put the hand on the head and the hand on the foot?
Oh, yes, one of them. Yes, William Scott said the devil put his hand on his head and on his foot, and everything between that belonged to the devil from then on. And the devil promised William golden gear enough, but he never got anything from him from that day to this. And hear the language coming through as well. Although Mr. Chalmers is mostly writing in standard English, people say things like, she wasn't canny, she was no canny, or she was not sonsy, it finally ends with. So you can hear some of the Scots language coming through, although it's being written formally by someone who could speak formal English.
What is sonsy? I know that from Burn.
Now, I know it too. I was puzzled by it because I couldn't find a good definition of it. People used to say when I was a teenager, oh, she's not fat, she's a big sonsy lassie. And I thought it meant healthy, but I think there's a wider meaning, which is wholesome. One of the vocabularies I looked at came across the expression sonsy conversation.
Oh, okay.
As well as you could be a sonsy body, or you could have a sonsy conversation. The word that covers that is wholesome.
Okay.
I did puzzle over some of the things, but let me tell you about the folk. The first one was Beatrix or Beatty Watson. She complained of slander, and she was a weaver's wife. Her husband was Alexander Scott. And in the end, 3 members of that family were executed. No, Beatty hanged herself, and 2 other members, her daughter Bessie and her brother-in-law William Scott, were executed, were burned, it says in the book. And we know that they were strangled before they were burned. Very few Scottish accused were burned alive. I never call them witches. I always call them the accused or the victims, because I know that these were false charges. To go back to Beatty, who hanged herself in the Tower, she was accused of causing harm, having an evil eye, by the way. And I didn't know that that term had ever been used in the British Isles. But yes, she was accused of having an evil eye that made horses particularly and cows go mad when she looked at them. She was forced to make this confession, and she was imprisoned, as Emma said, in the steeple, in the tower of the parish church, which is still there, and she hanged herself. She was supposed to be being watched, but the watchman fell asleep and she hanged herself. At that point, the case had been handed over to Lord Forester, George Lord Forester, who had previous experience. The Foresters also owned Clarkington near Temple on the other side of Midlothian, and that's in the Dalkeith Presbytery. And there were many, many witch hunts in the Dalkeith Presbytery, far more than Midlothian actually. And in 1630, 2 victims had been burned at Clarkington. And it's very clear that the accusation of the pact with the devil was common in that particular witch hunt, the Dalkeith one, 1630. So when Lord Forester gets involved, the scope widens and people are pressured into saying that they met with the devil, they made a pact with the devil, the rebaptism, the head and foot stuff. The second victim is Maggie Bell. And her husband's name was Niblo, by the way, which I didn't believe, but I looked it up in the Edinburgh telephone book, and there are Niblos, but it's spelt in the book Kniblo, but in the telephone book, there's no K. Maggie's husband made the complaint, thinking, well, Beatty made the complaint and look what happened to her. Maggie's husband made the complaint, but you get the same sequence of events. People start coming in with stories about her causing harm, bewitching people, having an evil eye, and so on. Then the third person to be dragged in was a very old woman. The confession begins, being 20 years and now near 80. She was nearly 80. She was my age, 79. And when she was 20 years old, she had been keeping sheep and cattle at Kinneil, which was also a Forester estate. Another member of the Forester family was married to the owner of that. And she met with a grim man who asked her to be his servant, and she agreed. And he said, if you want to meet me again, come to Avonbridge and call on my name John. That was all she knew about him. And she did go to Avonbridge, and she took a friend with her, and they both lay with the devil. And so you get another classic element of the witch hunt, the sex with the devil thing coming into it. But it's the only case of that in Corstorphine. However, what Kate was persuaded to confess to was a coven meeting on the hill of Claremison. And the devil was there with a plough drawn by swine. And he said, if the plough reached the top of the hill, and I can't walk on that grassy bit at the top without remembering this, that, if you go up, is it Drumbury Drive? Up to the top, there's a big grassy bit at the top. And this is where I can see it happening, because, this is land that could be ploughed, but with difficulty. And the swine didn't reach the top of the hill. So the devil's servants weren't going to get any benefit from this at all. No good harvest this year. And she was persuaded to name a lot of people. And they weren't all Corstorphine folk. There was Clattering Meg in Ratho, who I've never managed to track down. And there were a couple of people named who lived in Cramond, where I live now. And but of course, this gave the interrogators, the elders of the kirk, the opportunity to drag in a whole load of other people, including the 2 other members of the Scott family and Margaret Bailey, whose husband was a big farmer in Corstorphine and who had enough influence to get her released, saying that he brought witnesses to say, well, Kate Gibb had not said she was at the coven. She said she thought that Maggie was at the coven, but maybe not. And someone that looked like Alexander Scott, Beattie's husband, but might not have been because he had a grey cloak around him. So they got off.
An ambiguous identification that they managed to get off because of that ambiguity about whether or not it was them or not.
Yes.
Even like the modern day, when we're talking about identification is one of the most common things where there are problems in cases about identification. It's so interesting that they've managed to elide what would have been a horrific death by the identification not being up to scratch. Very interesting.
That's right. Yeah, I see what you mean. Then there was, I think I've got round to Marion Ingalls now. John Kincaid was dragged in to prick the two Scots, William Scott and his niece Bessie, who was only 15. Her baptism is recorded in the first register of Corstorphine parish. And it's interesting that you have, in the first place, two married women with families, and they're no more than middle-aged. They've got teenage children. And then you have Kate Gibb, who is nearly 80. And then you have Marion Ingalls. It's a milkmaid from Pilton who gives this evidence. Marion had, well, there was other evidence as well. Like there was a boy from Gorgie. There's a boy from Gorgie Mill who was on the hill. Marion lived at Clermison. And he came to her house and she asked him what he was doing there. And he said he was hunting cunning, which is rabbits. He was hunting rabbits. She said, I'll get one for you. And she sent her cat out and the cat came back with a rabbit. Now, I didn't know that cats can catch rabbits, but they do. They do. I've heard of a family cat, a cat within my extended family who has caught rabbits. Clearly, the boy thought this was probably the devil's familiar. It's not said explicitly, but it's only of a familiar in the Corstorphine witch hunt. As I say, lots of the common themes from the whole of Western Europe are in the Corstorphine witch hunt, and in such detail. It's very, very interesting. The bit of Marion's story that concerns John Kincaid is that he was called in to prick her, and he claimed to have found a witch's mark on Marion at the time that he pricked the two Scots. But at this point, for the first time, the Kirk session asked the presbytery for advice. Now, there are no minutes of the Edinburgh Presbytery from this period because politically they would have been full of dodgy stuff in 1649 because, Charles I had just been executed. The English regime was about to take over Scotland and so on. So there are no minutes of the presbytery, but the presbytery said that they wanted to see it done again. So the presbytery sent a representative and Kincaid couldn't find the mark on Marion because she cried every time the pin went in. I think there were no flies on Marion, but she was supposed to have been at the coven. At that point, yes, she had hired her daughter out to a farmer's wife at Pilton as a dairymaid, and the girl was promised the leftover milk to sell on the streets of Edinburgh, but she didn't get it. It was given to somebody else instead. And this other girl turns up in 1649 saying, 8 years ago, this happened. Marion Ingalls came to the farm and had a row with the farmer's wife about the milk. Indeed, the very first accusation involves a row about an unpaid bill for cloth that had been woven because the Scots were weavers. The Scots were a weaving family. And the report just suddenly comes to an end. The girl says, well, she doesn't know, but she always thought that Marion was not Sonsy. And nothing seems to have happened to Marion. There's no record of a trial or an execution or anything like that. So that, in brief, is about the Corstorphine folk and the way in which there are so many details and so many things that are typical of the witch hunt in general, but it's like it's coming home to Corstorphine. And there was never another. In 1656, two women who lived at the Gyle fell out and the one accused the other of bewitching her and her children. And the Kirk session was very, very reluctant to consider it an accusation. They insisted that this was because the two women had always hated each other, and they would please reconcile with each other as good Christian friends, and it would be recorded in the books so that no one was ever accused of having a reputation as a witch. And by then, George Lord Forester was dead. It was a different minister, different elders, but clearly they did not want to repeat the experience of 7 years before, which is more than you can say for many Kirk sessions in the Lothians, because there were tragically a huge number of witch hunts, substantial number of witch hunts around here. But this is how I became involved, because I grew up in Corstorphine and I knew a lot about the witch hunt in general and in England. And the database that was done by Edinburgh University is not very reliable specifically about Corstorphine. I think certain things were misread, and I've got the transcript. The transcript is in the Dower House, and the photocopies are in the Dower House as well. So if anybody who can read the handwriting wants to go and correct me, then they're welcome to do so. But I used my research skills that I had built up over the years to provide this as part of Corstorphine's history in the Dower House. And I'm really, really enthusiastic about this project now, because it means that it's going to become better known.
Norah, it's amazing. I mean, because of your work and what you have put into this, not thinking no doubt anything of it in that way at the time, we are going to know through the work that Emma has done and through the work that you have done, we are going to know about these people, know about these stories, not only us, but people visiting the area, visiting Corstorphine, going to Dower House. I mean, we're going to be there, surely, Zoe, as soon as there are so many places on our list of places to visit.
Yes.
Post-lockdown, we now only have to find the time to visit all these places, but it will be amazing to do so. So thank you so much, Norah, for preserving the lives of these people. And I think what it shows is that there were lots of restrictions on the source book of Scottish witchcraft as a research project, a lot of financial time, etc. And they say that in the book itself. And also with other places, nobody has done, and presumably the funding would be extortionate, a comprehensive review of all of these areas, of all of the Kirk sections.
Oh, there is a book on 5. There's Stuart MacDonald, I think. But there is a book on the witch hunt. I think it's just the 1649 one, because it was a year when there were lots. There's a book on 5, and it is very different, because you don't get the pact with the devil there.
Ah, that's interesting. That's interesting. We'll have a look for Stuart MacDonald. We'll have a look for that book and see if we can provide links to it so people can have a look. The work and the input that you have put in right at the start at going to these Kirk sessions and fleshing out, sometimes we might know the names, but we don't know the detail of the story. And it's those details, I think, that make people connect with these women as, inverted commas, just women, as we are just women now.
Yes.
Nora, you didn't mention what happened to Ket, I think it is, Ket Gibb.
Oh, yes.
She was, as Nora mentioned, she was nearly 80, so almost the same age as you, Nora, as you said. And I found her story really sad. It almost feels like I really would like you to say a little bit about it, because, I just think, if you don't mind, Nora.
She died being watched in a barn at Gogar. She lived at Gogar. She had lived at Kinneil when she was young. I think she must have been a servant of the Forrester family. But she lived at Gogar, and she was being watched in a barn, and she died while she was being watched. And that means being kept awake. Torture was actually forbidden. An act was passed by the Parliament in 1649 saying torture is not to be used. But keeping people awake, I mean, you know yourself. I'm sure we've all had the experience of getting brain fog through staying up too late working on what we're doing and so on. So imagine being prevented from sleeping. And she died while she was being, I think, pestered.
It's the horror, the sadness, the fact that for so long these women haven't been
And
remembered.
the man.
Oh, the one man, yeah.
And the man, sorry. I suppose I'm using a woman as a generic just because so many of them were women, but you're absolutely right. There were 15%, I think, across the board in Scotland, approximately, were men. Interestingly enough, the amount of people across Europe, again, as a generality, it was 80-20 split. But in Scotland, we seem to have a higher.
And I think in Iceland, it was the other way around.
That's absolutely right. We actually had, in one of our earlier podcasts, we meet with the Museum of Witchcraft in Iceland. And they told us, we had a great interview with her, and she told us about the people who were accused and convicted of witchcraft in Iceland. And they were, as you referenced earlier, a place where thankfully the witchcraft accusations didn't take off as much. And she believes, like Ireland, it was because people were much more believing or attuned or in touch with the idea of some other world. Like, it didn't seem like it needed to be the devil because they have the strong connection with trolls and other worlds, and Ireland has the connection.
Fairies.
And the fairies in the Highlands. Yeah.
So it's very, very interesting why in some places it didn't take off, and why, because of the various tensions in Scotland, it was embraced wholeheartedly, it would seem, sadly, to the detriment of so many women in Scotland over 200 years. Norah, can I ask, how long ago was it that you actually did this work?
I can't remember, because it was kind of after the year 2002 when I retired, but I was doing it before that. I think in the late 90s, because as I say, I was teaching the witch hunt as part of a European social history course, and I know that by 2003, when I was doing a summer school after I retired, I went and wrote up the Corstorphine witch hunt, because summer school students don't want to go and read library books. They want to have documents put in front of them. And I did, because the place where I lived in London was Edmonton, and there's a famous play, The Witch of Edmonton. So I gave them The Witch of Edmonton, the Corstorphine witch hunt, and the Salem witch trials, because quite a lot of them were American. So that was, I certainly done the bulk of it before 2003.
We're so glad that work was properly preserved for that 2 decades or so that Emma was able to get on them and work on them. I mean, hopefully at some point we will presumably all try and meet up at the museum, if that would be possible.
Yes.
Well, Emma, Norah, thank you so much for coming and speaking to us and giving us your time so generously, and telling us that the work that Norah has done and that Emma, you and others now in Corstorphine are building on. It's so lovely to think of a modern movement of Corstorphine women coming out in force for those women of Corstorphine. They would have no sense of a possibility that hundreds of years later we'd be living in this world that they would no doubt consider magic, even the way that we're speaking to one another on the internet.
Yes.
It's so amazing, and it makes me feel so positive about the whole process of remembering these women, and I'm grateful to you both for what you've done.
Yeah, well, I want to say a huge thank you to Norah for doing all that work, really, because it really brought it all to life for me. And a really big thank you to you and Zoe for having us on today, because it feels like this is part of that remembering and part of honouring the people of Corstorphine.
Thanks for joining us for this week's episode. It's been fascinating, as per usual, I would say. And please do get in touch with us on all our socials so we can have a chat with you. The best place to get us is on Twitter, because we can reply quite quickly and have a nice conversation there. We've got a page on Facebook that you can follow us on there, where we'll keep you up to date with what's happening. But we're also on Instagram. And Claire, you've still not made any TikToks, but we are on TikTok.
I've not made TikToks, but do you know what else we're on? We're on YouTube. We keep forgetting. Yes. And despite the fact we keep forgetting it, we've had 8,000 hits on the poem for Miss Moneypenny, who did the poem about the Witches of Scotland in remembrance of them. So yeah, I looked the other day, and without anyone having tended it or reminded anything about it, it's flourished into quite a busy site. So I was thinking, Zoe, when we are going to go out and about soon and meet a few people that we've been talking to, that we said, oh, when things get a bit better, we'll come for tea and cakes. I was thinking maybe we could record ourselves and put that up on YouTube.
Good plan. Very good plan. Yeah, excellent.
Okay, well, let's do that. So yeah, Insta, Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, and YouTube.
So modern and professional.
We're busy, busy women.
It's impressive.
I like how we've got a fantastic show and we're very impressive.
I think what's impressive about it is that we just get really great guests on.
That's what it is.
Who know all their stuff, and you and I just kind of go, hi, and then they do their thing, and then we go, bye, and then that's it.
I have listened actually to a few of our earlier episodes just to go back and reminisce, Zoe. And we were woefully poorly informed, it has to be said.
But that's good. And I think that's actually the unique selling point of our podcast, is that we are definitely not pretending that we know anything about it. So we're learning at the same time as the listeners. And I think that's much more interesting than having two bossy boots come on and just go, here's all the stuff you need to know. I think it's good to sort of grow and, you know, challenge some preconceptions and learn things.
I love the way that you put a positive spin on our ignorance, Zoe. I love that.
A positive spinner of stuff.
Well, I look forward to growing further with our audience next week. Yes. Oh no, not next week, a fortnight's time, as ever.
Yes, that'll be good. Okay, thanks very much, listeners.
Thank you, listeners. Bye.
If you'd like to learn more about the Witches of Scotland, please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Sign up for our mailing list at www.witchesofscotland.com to keep updated with the campaign. On that site, you'll be able to find how to link with us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram.